Loki, everybody, episode 4? Yeah, episode 4, because we're only getting 6. Then we got like 2 episodes left. Before I get into Loki, I just want everybody real quick to check out the new t-shirt that I just copped on imaginativevisions.com, hosted by my boy Justin, fellow podcast member Justin from tacosandgeeks.com. You can go on tacosandgeeks.com to pick up this particular t-shirt and other t-shirts as well. I got other ones coming in the mail soon, and I can't wait to show them off to you guys and sport them so you guys can check them out yourselves and hopefully purchase one. Go on down, get yourself a t-shirt, tell them Icon sent you. And you know, and you know, it's one of those things where I didn't just buy it because like, oh, you know, Justin and I are friends and we're podcast members, you know. It's like, you know, when you know, we're all out here trying to do our thing, you know, trying to bring our vision, you know, to the masses. So, you know, you have to support. It's not a situation, I didn't go to him and say, hey, give me a free t-shirt and I'll plug it, you know, like the next time I do one of my review videos where I'll plug it, you know, like on my YouTube channel. I actually paid money for, you know, for this t-shirt because I like the t-shirt and I want to support the cause and support the friend. So again, so go to tacosandgeeks.com, click on Imaginative Visions, check out all the t-shirts and, you know, and all the new stuff that he has coming up. Check out his reviews for all things anime, Imaginative Visions, where imagination becomes reality. Go ahead and check it out. So, Loki now. In the last episode, both him and female Loki, they tried to escape you know, that planet that almost exploded, and they were trying to get to the rocket ship, but they didn't get to the rocket ship. The rocket ship had exploded, and then both of them basically walked away in defeat because they knew they were about to die on that alien planet. And then when the episode picks up, it shows us when Sylvia, I believe that Sylvia is what she's calling herself. It shows when Sylvia was a child and when she was on Asgard, and you know, she was playing with her toys or whatever, and then she had the accent, and then it showed the moment where the timekeepers busted it and they were just like, oh, you don't belong here. They're just like, oh, at the bequeath of the time bureau, you know, like, you are hereby to be erased and reset immediately. And then she just looking at, because she's a kid, she's looking at them like, what are you talking about? So then they scoop her up, they bring her back to the, you know, to the time bureau, and you know, they erase her timeline. Now, a lot of people are saying the whole thing about like her and Loki are the same person. She's just a female version. She's really not, because remember, Loki was adopted. Loki was the son of Alfie, which was the frost giant. This girl ain't a frost giant. She's still an orphan. Like Thor's daddy, you know, like All Father, he still took her in. But she comes from a different place. Like, she's not a frost giant. Her and Loki are not related, blood, whatever. They're just 2 orphans that were adopted by the king of Asgard. So that's very important to know later. So while the 2 of them are, you know, and then when the, you know, when Sylvia got yoked up and brought, you know, she got brought back to the time bureau, the judge girl, brown skin girl, I can't remember. The thing with her is I can never remember her name. And the reason why I can't remember her name is because she reminds me and looks just like Kerry Washington. And, and in my brain, I keep calling her Kerry Washington, and I need to stop. But because I don't remember her name, we're gonna call her Kerry Washington. See the problem that I'm having here? So so back before not Kerry Washington became the judge that hands out, you know, like, you know, sentences to all the remnants, the time remnants or whatever, she herself was a soldier. This will come into play later. And she was the one responsible for bringing in Sylvia and presenting her before the person who was the judge then. But Sylvia, as a child, she managed to get out of her custody. She stole her little like time device, opened a portal for herself. She jumped in the portal, and that's how Sylvia escaped. So not Kerry Washington. I guess eventually she lived down the shame of that, and she eventually rose to power to become a judge and be the person that passed the sentence. But the fact that she let Sylvia get away from her as a child was always a stain on her record, and that was something that she always like held her head in shame about. So she always wanted to run that one back. And Sylvia, she was on the planet with Loki while they were waiting for the planet to explode, and she was telling Loki the same story about how, she was in Asgard and then she got snatched up. She went to the time bureau. She told Loki how she escaped, and then after she escaped, she said she just kept traveling through time, going to different places. But she said that every time she went to a different place, it was like a flare that went up, and the time variants kept coming. The time bureau kept coming for her, and then eventually she found out that she could hide in cataclysmic events, and then that's where she spent her childhood. That's where she grew up. She basically grew up in places where the world died every single time. And for her, she was just like, it was kind of like traumatic. And then, she was pouring her heart out. And then Loki started pouring his heart out, and then he was just like, oh, whatever happened. Because she said, she was like, is it a curse of being a Loki? And he was just like, no, because we never die. He was like, we may lose from time to time, but Lokis can't die. And at that point, they almost died. But then, they ended up holding hands. And once they started, because they like each other, they're like feelings are being developed between the two of them. And which is why I brought up the whole thing about them. They're not the same person, but they're starting to like each other. They do like each other. And the fact that that's the case, that they do like each other, that caused a new ripple effect in time. So the time variant bureau, they found out, the TVA, they found out where the two of them were. They went there and they snatched them up and they brought them back to headquarters. After they brought them back to headquarters, they split the two of them up. They put Sylvie in one room, they put Loki in another. And then, Mobius, I keep calling him Owen Wilson. Mobius, he ends up talking to him. And then he's just like, oh, what are your plans? Like what's going on here? And then he's like, I'll tell you nothing. And then he was like, oh, I do have something to tell you, but until you're ready to listen. And then he was just like, well, don't worry about your little girlfriend because we killed her. And then he was just like, good riddance then. And then he was just like, wow. And then because he could, everybody knew that was bullshit. And then he could see on his face, he was just like, yo, you actually like her? And he was just like, I do not. He was like, yo, you like her? He was like, it's so weird because she's technically you. And I'm like, she's really not. But she was just, but then he was just like, is she dead? Damn it. And then, Morbius was like, no, she's not dead. But he was like, now I know you're lying to me and you've been lying to me. So he was just like, do you have anything to say? He said, any of the lies you want to tell me before we get rid of you? And then he was like, yes, he's like, the TVA has been lying to you all this time. And then they took him and they threw him in prison. Now, here's where it got kind of cool. The prison that they put him in was a time loop of a moment in his past. And it was a moment in time where he cut the hair off of a certain soldier back on Asgard. And then when that soldier found out, she came and punched him in the face and then kicked him in the nuts. Now, the cool thing about it was the person that he did that to was Lady Sif. And I like Lady Sif and I miss Lady Sif. She was on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. quite a few times, but she wasn't in Thor Ragnarok. She didn't die. That's the thing. The funny thing about Lady Sif was when Asgard got destroyed, Lady Sif wasn't there. So she never died. So this whole time, we don't know what happened to her. I mean, we still don't know what happened to her, but this is just a memory. But the fact that they brought the actress back to do that scene hopefully means that she's gonna pop up somewhere down the line in reality, and maybe in Lord of God, because actually isn't she supposed to show up in Thor Lord of Thunder, Love of Thunder, or whatever the hell it is? I think she's supposed to show up. But anyway, but as it was cool to see Lady Sif, and they did the whole thing where she punched him in the face, she kneed him in the nuts, and then they kept doing it over and over and over and over again until Loki could take no more, and he was like, I'm sorry, Lady Sif. He's like, I did it because it was funny. He's like, I'm a narcissist and I need attention all the time, but it wasn't funny and I do apologize. And then she was just like, oh, but you'll always be alone. And then she punched him in the face and kneed him in the nuts again. So now Morbius, he's walking around because after Loki told him that the TVA has been lying to you this whole time, he's now starting to think and he's starting to wonder what's really going on here, because he does have his doubts and he has his suspicions. He ends up having drinks with not Kerry Washington, and then she told him, she was just like, oh, a job well done, and another Loki locked up, and then he was asking her questions. He was like, yo, the girl that that the female Loki ended up mind blasting, whatever happened to her? And then Kerry Washington lied, and she was like, oh, we killed her because her mind was gone. And he was just like, no, it wasn't. He said she was perfectly fine. She was like, oh no, her mind was gone, don't worry about it. And then he was just like, oh, but why wouldn't you let me interview the female Loki? Then she was just like, why are you asking questions? She was just like, aren't we friends? Aren't we partners? And I feel like there was more than that, but but she was just like, oh, don't concern yourself with silly questions. So then he's not stupid. And then, he ended up toasting. He had her turn her back for a second, and then he took her little time device and he switched it out. He switched his device with hers. So he took her device, and then he was watching the footage on her device, he was watching the footage of the interrogation with the girl who got brain blasted by Sylvia in the last episode, like the one where she took her to the diner, and then she was just like, oh, I had a life, like I was a part of the world, and then the girl started like freaking out, and then like they ran up on her, and they like they snatched her. I don't know where they took her. I guess they made her disappear or whatever, but the girl basically found out the truth, and then the TVA tried to keep it under wraps. So now Morbius is just like, shit. He was like, what Loki said is true. So he goes back into Loki's room, and he was just like, yo, when Sylvia, because Loki told him, he said that Sylvia has the power to to bring back the memories of where you used to be. He told him flat out, he was just like, yo, all of you are time variants. He was like, all of you are variants. He was like, you were all picked. He said you were all plucked and picked from different moments of timelines that have now been erased. He was like, you had a family. He was like, you had a life. And then now Morbius is starting to believe him based on what he saw on on that device machine. And then he decides to like break Loki out of prison, because he's just like, you better not be lying to me. So he was just like, I assure you I'm telling the truth. And he was just like, I guess I'll have to trust you. Now Sylvia, the black female soldier, because Sylvia took over her mind in one of the previous episodes, she got into her memories too, and we forget about that, and so now she saw her old future. She saw her old past, and she went for answers immediately. She went to Sylvia's room, and then she was just like, yo, come with me, bitch. And then she brought her to some empty place, and then she was just like, oh, those memories, that you plant those? And she was like, no, I can't plant the memories. I can only take what is already there. And then she was like, do it again. And then she did it again. And then she saw her life play out, and then she was like, oh my God. She was like, I used to be happy. And then she was just like, oh, you're right. She's like, you're right. The TVA has been lying to us. So she was like, now what do we do? And then it cuts back to where Morbius and like Loki tried to escape, and then not Kerry Washington, her and the goon squad showed up, and then she was like, oh, Morbius, she's like, I think you have something in mind. And then he was just like, yeah. Earlier she had asked him like, oh, if you could go anywhere in the world, what would you do? And then he didn't answer her, because he was like, I work for the TVA. He's like, I can go anywhere in the world and do whatever I want to do. But then at that moment he did answer the question. He told her, he was like, listen, what I actually would like to do is go back to my life before the TVA snatched me up. And it was at that moment where where Morbius finally believed Loki, and he believed his own suspicions, and he truly, he knows that he did have a life before this, and and he knows that everything's been a sham up until this point. And then not Kerry Washington had the goons basically evaporate him, which I thought was weird. And then after they evaporated him, they snatched up Loki. They went to go to Sylvia's chamber, and then Sylvia wasn't there. Well, she was there, but then Kerry, not Kerry Washington, she was just like, oh, somebody else was here with her, and then they were just like, oh, the black woman was there with her, but we don't know what happened to her. So then they snatched up Sylvia, and then they took Sylvia and Loki, and they actually presented them before the Time Masters, or like the Time Gods, whatever the hell we're calling them. So they're finally there, like face to face, looking at the Time Gods, and the Time Masters, they were just like, oh, you don't know nothing, child. And she was like, I know this is all bullshit, what the TVA is doing. And for some reason, like, I can't tell if not Kerry Washington is brainwashed, or is she honestly just drinking the Kool-Aid, because I don't know if she's in on the whole thing or whatever. Like, she might be in on the whole thing, but I guess we'll find that out in episode 5. But then after that, the Time Masters, they were just like, oh, the two of you will be erased immediately. And they were just like, oh, it's time, we pass judgment. He's like, erase these beings. And then after that, Sylvia was just like, I'm not done yet. And then the black girl came downstairs. She took the collars off of both Sylvia and Loki. And then like they all started fighting. This big fight happened with everything. Loki was fighting the soldiers. And then this is the reason why they showed us the reason why in the beginning of the episode they showed not Kerry Washington being in a soldier suit, is because at that moment her and Sylvia had a one-on-one fight. So just so the audience doesn't say, oh, now all of a sudden this girl knows how to fight, they were just like, yeah, she's a soldier, so she does have skill. And the two of them did get into a fight, and Sylvia won the fight. She knocked Kerry Washington out, and then Loki won his fight with the soldiers. And then the time variants were just like, oh, you think you've defeated us? And then she was just like, no, I've killed you. And then she threw a sword at one of them, cut his head off. His head rolled on the floor. And then, like I said from the beginning, because I was just like, yo, these people aren't even real. They're not real. The so-called time, the TVA is a sham, and these the time monsters, time lords, whatever the hell, they're robots. So, and Loki brought up an interesting question. He was like, well, shit, if they're robots, who's actually running the TVA? He's like, who's really doing this? Well, it's probably a Loki. He's just like, who's running this whole thing? And then she was just like, oh, more questions. And she's like, I can't take this mental torture. And then at that moment, Loki walked over to her and he was like, listen, we're going to find out what happened. He was like, we'll definitely find out what happened. But he's like, I must tell you something. And he was trying to get up the courage to tell him how he feels about her. He was trying to get up the courage to tell her that he loves her, he cares about her, he has feelings for her. But before he was able to get the words out, not Kerry Washington woke up and she vaporized Loki and quote unquote killed Loki in his own show. And as soon as she evaporated Loki, I was just like, he ain't dead. Because the name of the show is called Loki. So unless we're switching out Tom, I was about to call him Tom Riddle. So unless we're switching him out for Sylvia going forward, which we're not, I was like, he's obviously not dead. And then after that, Sylvia grabbed not Kerry Washington, yoked her up against the room. And then she was like, go ahead and evaporate me too. And then she was just like, no, bitch, you're going to tell me everything about the TVA. Which is true because she's got to know. Like, I refuse to believe this chick is just blindly drinking the Kool-Aid. She has to know that they were fake, because when she was talking to Owen Wilson in the room, she was being very dismissive about his comments, his questions, comments, and concerns, to the point where you felt like she was in on, the fix was in and she was in on it. So we'll find out if she's in on it or not, but she's going to end up having to spill the beans to Sylvia in the next episode. So then the credits roll. And then finally we get a post-credit scene, we get a post-credit scene where Loki's not dead, and then he wakes up, and then he's like, oh, is this the afterlife? And then they're just like, no, this is Loki land. And then he looks up and he sees a whole bunch of different Lokis just all standing there looking at him. Because like the TVA said that they deal with Lokis all the time. And I guess they've evaporated all these Lokis every time they're done with them, and they all get transported someplace. Like the TVA basically lied and told, and told all the soldiers that, when you evaporate somebody, they're gone forever, but it actually teleports them somewhere. And the person who created the TVA, the person who's behind this, which is going to be a Loki, that's the person who created the device. The question is, why did that person create a device that teleports Lokis to that place? But we'll find all that in the next episode. So thank you for tuning in. Leave your thoughts below. Again, the show's still not great, but at least something finally happened. Something interesting finally happened on the show. So I'm definitely happy about that, because the show has been dragging. But to see Lady Sith was cool. To have some action, was cool. And then, the whole Loki land thing is cool. But like I said, there's interest there now, so we'll continue to follow it and see where it goes, since we only got 2 episodes left. Check me out on Twitter. Check me out on Instagram as always. Hit me up on YouTube so we can talk and go back and forth and share our comments about all the superhero goodness. Check out imaginativevisions.com, on tacosandgeek.com, so you can pick yourself up one of these t-shirts. I got another t-shirt coming soon, and I'll model it on the next video as well. So that's it, guys. Thank you for tuning in, and for Loki until episode 5, I guess. I'll see you next time. And about this bitch.